Hi, everybody. Welcome. Getting started just 2 minutes late, but I hope that's all right. Hope everybody's having a good night so far. Hasn't spent too much time on Zoom today. We're really happy to have you here. Welcome to CEP Ottawa's event on water, the first one we've done on water in quite some time, kind of in line with everything that's happening with Water Month. My name is Lucas Fraser. I'm the president of CEP Ottawa. CEP is an organization, a nonprofit, volunteer-led organization with chapters all across Canada with the objective to bring people together within the environment and sustainability fields to facilitate conversations and kind of inspire action among people, as well as keeping everybody up to date on what's happening in the field. So we're really excited to have you here and looking forward to kind of getting into this discussion tonight. So I won't hold this up for too long. Tonight, we have the future of water, imagining the possibilities. This is a panel discussion with 3 incredibly interesting panelists, and it's going to should be quite an interesting discussion tonight. So I'm not going to spend too much time here getting into it, as I can't speak to water as well as anybody who's on this panel. So just kind of overall how this event is going to go tonight. We're going to have introductions quickly from everybody, a panel discussion with the panelists, and then we'll actually get into a live Q&A. So what I'll suggest is throughout the event, if you have questions, just throw them in the Zoom chat. That's going to be the best way to get those in front of the speakers. Just send your questions as they come up, and we'll make sure we leave a lot of time at the end for that Q&A. And then finally, we're going to move into a breakout room networking session just to give everybody a chance to kind of get to know each other. If you want to stick around, you're more than welcome to. So that should be a lot of fun. Before the event actually starts, I just want to say a couple quick things about CEP. Like I said, volunteer-led organization based in Ottawa. So we try to really focus our content on Ottawa. And we host events just about every month. That may even be kicking up going forward. But we're really focusing on, putting out interesting content, interesting events that give people a chance to stay up to date on what's happening in the field, but also meet others and connect with people in the field. We try to incorporate some sort of networking, interactive workshop element to every single one of our events. So if that's something you're interested in, you should definitely stay up to date. If you want to stay up to date on what we're doing, the best way to do that is by signing up on our website. At the top right corner of our website, you'll see a login button. If you click that, create an account, you'll get email updates with everything we do. It's like signing up for a newsletter, but just in a kind of slightly different way. So that's all I'll say about CEP. And now I'll hand it over to Pallavi, who is our VP of Events, who's going to be moderating tonight's panel. She is the Vice President of Events for CEP Ottawa and has been part of the team for a year. She's also a policy advisor for ICED. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to you, Pallavi.
Thanks, Lucas. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everybody. Great to see you join us for this exciting panel today. So for this panel, we have a expert panelists who are going to talk to us about water, the challenges around it, and looking at the future possibilities of what we can expect and hope in the landscape for water. So in my day-to-day work, I do focus on water, especially water tech, and how I try to understand the landscape around water technology development in Canada and how to support it further. So the water sector in Canada, it was what we consider fairly mature. There are various interesting technologies that have come out of Canada. And the sector is very robust with a lot of research that happens in here, a lot of employment that's part of the water sector. And it's a very important resource. We need water for our daily lives. It's used heavily in industry and agriculture. So it's a very big part of us, but we often don't think about it a lot. So this panel will help us kind of discuss with each other some of those issues, hear from experts, and then really kind of think of, where water is going and what are the future possibilities for it. So today for the panel, we have Professor Banu Ormechi from Carleton. She's the Jarolowski Chair in Water and Global Health and also the Canada Research Chair. We also have Alan Shapiro, who's a Vancouver-based water and sustainability expert and the director of Water Next. We also have a third panelist, Natasha Johnson, who is a water engineer with the City of Ottawa. However, she's having some tech difficulties, and she'll join us in a bit if she is able to. So, because we are here for a fixed amount of time, so I think we should get started with this panel with Alan and Banu, who, have joined us today for this. So, let's start it. Thank you so much, the respected panelists, for joining us. Please, tell us a bit about yourself, your careers, and how you got where you are. Why don't we start with Banu first, and then we'll go to Alan.
Okay, so I received my master's and PhD degrees from Duke University in the US. And then in 2005, we moved to Canada and I started my faculty position at Carleton. And no regrets, we love Canada. It was the best decision now looking back. So at Carleton, my research mostly focuses on wastewater treatment. I am an engineer by training, so there's a lot of technology development, process optimization, design. In addition to treatment part, I also work on real-time monitoring. There's a huge need for that. And also I am an environmental engineer, so we do a lot of work on public health and environment related issues. So this is mostly impacts of like emerging contaminants and pathogens and whether they're removed at wastewater treatment processes, and if they're not, what is the impact on public health. So for example, right now I have two big projects. One of them is on COVID-19 monitoring in wastewater-based epidemiology as a way to, predict trends and maybe use it as an early detection. And another project on microplastics. So there is also an emerging new pollutant now. They are everywhere. They're there for hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, depending on the type of plastics. And I do a lot of mentoring, a lot of outreach with schools, undergraduate students, graduate students. I have patents. I'm very involved internationally, and I chair or serve on the boards of various international water organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Alan.
Hey, well, I've got very little to add to that illustrious background, but really, really honored to be here today with the Cep Ottawa group. So I've got a little bit of a non-traditional water background. I come from a hydrogeology background that I haven't used in a little while, and have always straddled this world of water science, water engineering, along with policy and business. So for me, I've been interested in systems change around water, from taking the issues that we see outside our window, like drought and flooding in BC, to how can we actually look at the big levers that affect action around this, whether that's business investment, whether that's policy, and whether that's research. So for myself, I started out in the consulting space and worked for a while working on environmental assessments and contaminated sites. And then after a while, got the sense that a lot of the projects that I was working on had already been scoped and were bound by the regulations that were on the ground as I was working on them. So not a lot of leeway to look at change, not a lot of leeway to look at larger impact. And so over the course of the past few years, I've dabbled around with various consulting hats to try to zoom out as much as I can and look at water as a systems issue. So part of that has been through the lens of science communication, which has looked at how do we mobilize knowledge from research organizations and get it into the hands of policymakers and the business community. And then more recently through the lens of innovation, and right now working on a new platform called WaterNext out of Foresight Cleantech Accelerator in Vancouver, looking at how do we build out a pan-Canada water technology ecosystem. So the idea is that water fits into a lot of different areas, and there's challenges in water and agriculture in Canada, water and energy in Canada, and then the traditional water sector that we think about with water utilities. But how do we pull out water as a cross-cutting theme and start to look at supporting innovation and sustainability and equity across each of these different sectors? So I can chat more about that when we get to opportunities, but really excited to join you guys today.
Thank you so much for your introductions. I think something that you both underscored is the different angles from which that we could look at water, from the public health perspective or from the innovation perspective, the technology development. So it's very varied in Canada, and I feel like the time we have might not be enough to kind of discuss them all. But we'll try to focus on, what your expertise is on. So let's discuss what some challenges do you see for water and wastewater management in Canada. Again, I'd like to invite Banu to start, and then Alan, if you can go after.
Okay, so the main challenges, and it is even really sad to say this, like we're a developed country, we're a rich country, and yet we're still not able to provide safe drinking water to our people, as well as safe sanitation. Okay, so that's just not acceptable. And it's a complex issue, there are various reasons, and it's also important to acknowledge that, in terms of land, it's a huge country, and in terms of population, we're tiny, we're very small. And so there are, remote communities, which is difficult to take these technologies, but the current situation is really not acceptable. Now, as Canadians, we have this great reputation. We're nice people, and we do our best. But like, if you look at our environmental footprint, it's really terrible. Like, we're one of the most polluting people, and in some categories, as much as Americans. Like, if you look at our water consumption, carbon footprint, and so that also applies to generation of wastewater, water consumption, and we're not doing a very good job with treatment either. So in Canada, I think one of the main challenges is, for whatever reason, water and wastewater infrastructures have been underfunded. Like, it's a chronic problem, and as a result, that affects the quality of the services provided to Canadians. So if you look at our wastewater collection system, wastewater treatment systems, or drinking water treatment or distribution systems, and I travel a lot because of my job, I've seen, hundreds and hundreds of treatment plants in other countries. And so what we really have is rather basic, I would say. We're fortunate in Ottawa. We have a amazingly well-operated drinking water treatment plant and wastewater treatment plant. Very qualified people. They're doing an amazing job, but the lack of funding is still there, and so that is a problem. We also we're not in the habit of collecting data. so that's really very interesting, like, compared to other countries. In order to, identify environmental problems or water problems, or, how much water we use, like what is the level of contamination here and there. And so there is almost no real-time data monitoring or collection. And so that is a huge problem, because that is directly related to our ability to identify problems before they become like a huge issue, and our ability also to solve them. Finally, we are one of the most impacted countries for climate change. And climate change, Alan has all the hydrogeology background, but he would be the real expert here. But climate change, of course, it does change hydrological patterns, and then water availability, water demand, as well as water quality, and the impact on wastewater discharges to surface waters, for example, combined sewer overflows. We all know about it, but there are lots of other impacts. So the wastewater treatment plants, for example, the level of wastewater treatment, the impact on temperatures, quantities, etc. So it is a big problem for Canada. It's just we're not really acting on it. And I would also say that this is another issue that I see a lot, that we tend to be reactive than proactive. We know that it is coming, it's going to happen. There's already lots of flooding and other issues, and we tend to wait until it's a disaster, major issue, and then we act on it. So hopefully that will be different in the future.
Thanks. Those were some really important issues, and I think the one you mentioned at the end, being reactive and proactive, is something that is very true, and we see that everywhere. The challenges with aging infrastructure, or even kind of regulation catching up and things like that, right? I think I can see Alan nodding, so I'll go over to Alan to see what he thinks are some key challenges for water and wastewater in Canada.
So I had 3 challenges written down, all of which have been mentioned, which are equity, sustainability, right, for sure. How can we make sure that the kinds of lifestyles that we're accustomed to with respect to drinking and wastewater in big cities is something that applies to all Canadians? Number 2 is climate in all of its forms, right, and all of the water risks and all of the water challenges that comes along with that. And number 3 is aging infrastructure. So I'm going to take a different spin, maybe a little bit on that question, and talk about the types of problems we're facing. Because for the history of Canada, we've looked at a lot of water challenges as engineering water challenges. This is a simple cause-effect challenge solution. And for a large part of the challenges that we face, that's worked, right? We've successfully in BC managed to harness most of our power from water sources, right? And when this was an engineering question and engineering solution, not a lot of challenges associated with it. But the kinds of water challenges we're facing now are what would fall into the category of wicked problems. That means that we've got multiple stakeholders, we've got a complex problem landscape with no clear cause effect, and we've got no simple one solution that we're pulling towards. And so any one of these issues, let's talk about drinking water and equity in Canada. On the one hand, we're seeing a lot more investment from the federal government in drinking water solutions for First Nations communities. But we're looking at the entire landscape of colonialism and reconciliation that ties into that. We're looking at the geography of Canada. We're looking at relationships between people and water. And so the types of problems that we're facing around water inherently are just going to require much more complex engagement, research, and solutions. And we're getting to the end of our ability to engineer water solutions in the same way that we've been able to for most of Canada's lifetime so far.
Thanks, and thanks for adding that spin on it. So given kind of this understanding of issues with water and wastewater in Canada, I would like to shift this conversation now to solutions and possibilities for the future. So to our panelists, what do you think are some of the opportunities and potential in the water sector in Canada as we look to the future and aim for better water infrastructure and better water systems and better connections between how people's relationship with water. Let's do counterclockwise now. I'll ask Alan to maybe comment first, and then go over to Banu.
I genuinely believe that there's so many opportunities in the Canadian water space. I mean, my career challenge so far has been that there's so many exciting opportunities, I can't decide which one I want to pursue. So at least on the opportunity side, I think there's a lot, and there's a lot of exciting things with the last few years and the current government that we've seen come up, whether that's the Canada Water Agency conversation, the Blue Economy Strategy conversation, these larger national themes around conversations that have historically been regional and sector specific. So I've got 3 opportunities to highlight, and one is self-serving, it's innovation. So WaterNext, I'm working on a platform that I genuinely believe in, which is how can we stitch together innovation across sectors and across regions. So Pallavi, you mentioned at the beginning that we've had some very successful water tech companies in Canada's history, but we haven't had an effective water tech landscape in Canada's history. We've had a couple of companies, they've done very cool things, but largely these companies come up with their own solutions. They're a set of very specific conditions at the time, and then we don't replicate that. And so I think there's an exciting opportunity to start to grow the kinds of innovations that we need for Canadian water challenges, and by extension to adopt them. So how do we bring adopters and companies and entrepreneurs and innovators to the table together and do that in an equitable way. So look at Indigenous innovation, right? Look at innovation from marginalized communities as well, and not just from sort of more traditional innovation centers. So innovation to me is one. Number two is integration. We as Canada are so large of a country and so small of a population that anytime we look at regional or sector specific efforts, we lose that economy of scale. So how can we start to look at water cross-cutting as a theme, right? And we're really having now the international language to be able to do that. So we've got SDG 6, Sustainable Development Goal around water and sanitation. We've got planetary boundaries around fresh water. So the international community is starting to look at water as a cross-cutting theme. And I think there's an opportunity now for Canada to plug into that and also look at water in an integrated way. So that's my number two. And the last one is equity and sustainability. So the types of water futures that we're trying to build just fundamentally haven't been built before. If we were to put one pipe in the ground for every pipe we take out with our aging infrastructure, we've got a great engineering solution, but these aren't resilient systems that are able to adapt to climate change. These aren't systems that connect people to their water footprint and their water use. And these definitely aren't systems that are scalable to remote and Indigenous communities. So looking at what is the kind of water future we're trying to build, and how can we make sure that we design that in an equitable and sustainable way from day one? I think that's a huge opportunity, and an opportunity not just for Canada, but an opportunity for groups within Canada that haven't historically been part of the water sector to really get pulled into the conversation.
Thanks. Those are some, great kind of topics that you've identified for solutions, and I'm sure there are some. We could have more discussions on them as the audience might also be interested in some questions. But let's hear from Banu first, and then we'll go to the audience for questions.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll follow up on Ellen's points. So, and I agree with all of them. So water being a unifying topic, that's so important. And so we have a Global Water Institute at Carleton University, and it's the only water institute in Ottawa. And Ottawa is a great location. Why? Because we have the federal government, we have government labs, we have the embassies and trade organizations. And the institute is multidisciplinary. I'm the director of the institute. But when I really started working on it, like I look at water, I'm an engineer, okay, like there's surface water, drinking water, wastewater. And then I work with colleagues in African studies, for example, or like with a geologist, like for them, water is trapped in a stone. Okay, so, but it is such a unifying topic, and it's not just science and engineering, but it's social sciences, humanities. So that is really very important, and it also shows there's a lot that can be done around water. Okay, so innovation is very important, and innovation is so difficult, I find, in Canada. And I also have patents, and like some of my patents have been commercialized, they're used in the market, okay? But I mean, like, don't hold your breath, okay? So there's lots, and I see this, like there's lots of great invention at universities, but the ability to move those great ideas or inventions from universities to the market, I think there's really a disconnect there, and it's very, very difficult to achieve that. And also Ellen's last point on sustainability and the need for new systems and equitable systems. So sustainability is very important. And how we do water and wastewater infrastructure. I mean, if you look at it, like if you go back to Romans, which is like 2,000 years ago, and this is one of my hobbies now. When I travel, I visit like antique Roman cities, and the water and wastewater infrastructure is basically identical. I mean, you really look at it, they had the sewer systems, they had the water distribution systems, everything, the design, they figured it out. And now, like after 2,000 years, we're not really doing anything much different. Okay, and so that has to change. We still rely on these like big mega wastewater treatment plants or systems, like all these like collection systems, and there's really no room for smaller, decentralized, but really sustainable, unique systems. And I'll give you an example from my research. For like freezing, natural freezing can be used as a method for wastewater sludge treatment. Like in Canada, how easy is that? You don't use chemicals, it is free, like you don't have to design anything. But unfortunately, we do not really use these sustainable methods. And going forward, I think there's a really important need to design systems, treatment systems, or water and wastewater infrastructure that are suitable for Canada, rather than, it's not like taking a BMW and making it small and push it to an indigenous community. That doesn't work, and that's what we have been doing. That's not the solution, but there's really a need to design innovative, context-appropriate technologies, water and wastewater infrastructure.
Yeah, that sounds like you've identified some great points there around decentralization, and also moving kind of great ideas from university to the market. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in those areas for us to design better systems, solve those kind of wicked problems that Alan mentioned, to bring in real sustainability and just better systems overall that probably have smaller footprints, and are better for the environment, but better environmental benefits to them. I see a lot of questions popping up. So we're also at kind of like the halfway mark. So I think it's a great time to go and see some of those questions that are being asked. I'll start from the bottom because I just saw Martha's question that showed up. So Martha wants to know, the competition between uses of water, is that an issue? Like, whether it's sanitation, water going for sanitation, or energy or agriculture, is that a challenge in Canada as to how we use our water? Do either of you want to take that?
I can take it. Alan, do you want to go ahead? Okay.
You go first.
Okay, so that depends on the context. Okay, I mean, in reality, if you look at the water consumption in Canada, a great majority of that goes to energy generation. Okay, and then there are the other industries, like agriculture is one of them. And what we really use, like at homes or like for people, washing, whatever. So that's really a very, very small percentage. So I wouldn't say that there is a direct competition between what is essential use for people and industries. But I mean, if you look at it, the majority of water consumption is really for energy generation. The challenge comes like from pollution related issues. And this is a big one, like oil sands tailings, that's like really very polluting. And so maybe it's not necessarily the quantity of the water that we compete for, but once, like it is very easy to contaminate a very large body of water supply, clean, fresh water supply with pollution, environmental pollution or wastewater discharges. So the real problem is maybe not the competition for quantity, but the deterioration of water quality, so it's not available anymore for human consumption. And there are lots of other examples of this, like even eutrophication, so like the blue-green algae and the toxins, and so you can. There are places that they used to take their drinking water from a lake, but now they cannot do that because it's full of toxins. Okay, so the issue, I think, is really the quality, water quality, rather than water quantity.
And maybe to build on that, I think we're kind of complacent in Canada because water quantity hasn't historically been an issue, although increasingly it is in some regions. So, for example, the South Saskatchewan River Basin in Alberta is a basin that is now over allocated. So that means in a drought year, there are more permits and more guaranteed permits for water withdrawal than there is water in the river, right? So we've had the luxury in the past of not having competition, and increasingly in drier regions through climate pressures, we're going to see more competition. And so having our policy systems, having our water allocations be responsive to our climate variables and trends, and by extension, having the data that we need to actually make those decisions, which we currently don't, would help us anticipate and manage some of those issues, because they are coming for many regions.
And maybe just to add on to that, quick note that, I mean, you realize almost 80% of our population live within 100 kilometers of the US border, okay? So it doesn't really help having all this water up north because the population density is not there. So to Alan's point, yes, I mean, even though we seemingly have plenty of water, we don't necessarily have them where we need.
There's this myth of overabundance is what it's called, where all of us grew up canoeing or swimming or whatever else, and we're used to seeing water all around us, but much of that water is a relic of the last ice age. So as much as I'm happy getting to hike in my mountain lakes, the reality is most of that water, once we use it once, is not going to be recharged in the same way that we see it around us.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And, like you said, not a lot of us really realize that, because we see so much water around us that we don't, and we think, it's going to be recharged, there's the water cycle, it's going to replenish itself, but it's not, quite doesn't work that way. So even though we have this, visual abundance, we need to be more careful about how we use that, what kind of pollutants we are, putting in there, and what then we can take out of it. So that's a very important point there. I'm going to ask a question that I have, which is, so we've kind of talked about, the SDG 6, but also, how do you see water and water issues placed in terms of adaptation? So climate change adaptation, not just kind of the mitigation part of it, but also how, as we adapt to kind of, lower rainfalls or the scarcities, how do we deal with that?
I think our BC story is really, really telling, because we've got communities that in the last 2 years in BC have faced their worst ever flooding season, and other communities that have faced their worst ever drought season. Right? So it speaks to the fact that on the map, actually, precipitation trends don't necessarily change on average. So a lot of BC is expected to have very similar precipitation with climate trends over time. But it doesn't tell you what the impact is on our systems. And what the impact is that we have engineered systems for precipitation coming in a certain form at a certain time, and we have reservoirs that rely, for example, in Vancouver, on having a very solid snowpack that accumulates over the winter. And so I think that is one area in which we as Canada aren't doing necessarily a great job leading. And it's part of that same challenge of feeling disconnected from climate problems, right? I think for communities that are on the front lines of this is felt much more acutely. In BC, we're just starting to have the conversation about what does it mean if this drought is not a one-off event, it's a multi-year event. And public engagement is not there yet, so we're still very much starting that conversation. Policy mechanisms are still very much in development, and the research is leading the way, but I think there's a lot of space to get that research out into the communities that are impacted by it.
It is also a controversial issue, that because any adaptation measure that you may take for, to fix the situation with water and wastewater infrastructure, these are very, very, very extremely expensive projects. And one of the counterpoints is, if there's all these unknowns, like we don't really have a good understanding. Yes, like things are getting worse, but like to what extent, what is going to be the magnitude? So if we do not have a clear understanding on that yet. Should we be investing in the system, like this huge amount of money, and maybe run the risk that it's going to be not enough again in a very short period of time. So it is very interesting, but and it is very controversial too, in terms of how to invest, where to invest, what to focus on. And again, one of the reasons is we just do not have the data really to back it up, plot the trends and have a better understanding of it. What we know is like, oh, there's a big flood, or there has been 2 floods, but like not really quantitative data to really analyze it.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely important points around what we can do on adaptation. So thanks for that. And it's interesting to see the conversations happening in BC. I'm not really sure like where it is for Ontario or some of the other provinces so far, but I do think it's a very important topic to start discussing around the adaptation, the data needs, and how do we kind of prepare ourselves when our traditional ways of using water might be changed, or we can't rely on those water reserves in the same way. It can have real impact on livelihoods and just people's relationship with the water around them. Though we don't have those drastic things where giant lakes are drying up like in Africa or India, but I think we also are kind of it's beneficial to us that we have so much water, but we are a bit complacent, like Alan kind of identified earlier. So Eduardo had a question, but I think that was answered. Eduardo, do you still want to ask that question? Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, so he wanted to know what were the priorities, which we kind of discussed earlier. So Jessica wants to know what industry and citizens can do to tackle priority water problems in Canada.
I'm happy to take a stab at that. On the industry side, it really depends on where that industry is with respect to water. So part of what we're trying to do through Water Next is to bring industry to the table to have conversations about innovation and adoption. So if you are an industry that actively faces water challenges or is beginning to face water challenges, we would like those industries to be involved in the conversation to help develop solutions. One challenge that we face in Canada is that we've got a lot of very great water ideas, and there's an organization called Aqua Hacking that supports sort of these local events around local challenges and student groups and entrepreneurs, but we don't really have a way to pilot those ideas. We don't have enough stakeholders at the table with facilities to say, hey, we've got wastewater, let's try different treatment solutions. So for industry, understanding how water cross-cuts their operations, understanding their own water risks, and then coming to the table and being engaged in the broader conversation, I think is really important. And for the public, I think there's a level of connection to water in your community. So I've done quite a bit of speaking in Vancouver, and one question that I open with around water is, where does the water from your tap, where does the water come from when you turn on your tap? And a lot of people don't know. And I think regardless of where you live, having that level of connection to what is my local geography, what are my dollars going to pay for when I pay my water utility bill, or more likely for many Canadians, when I don't pay my water utility bill, and we talk about these big aging infrastructure challenges, where is that money coming from? And so looking around to see how water intersects your life, and particularly through a climate lens of what does climate change mean for water in my community? I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, definitely. Understanding kind of, what your relationship is and how you're impacting and how, what's the watershed around you look like. It could be a way to start for individuals to take more action on water issues for sure. Okay, on to the next question. We have a few of them, so we'll power through them all. So Philip wants to know, who can help with decentralized system uptake? And he's talking about Pembroke City's planning objectives, but there's no mention of LID or decentralized system preferences. Banu, do you want to take that?
Yes. So that is the problem, is it? And unfortunately, I mean, part of this is the engineers. I'll take the blame. Engineers are trained to be very traditional. You know, they do not take risks. They tend to, stick to systems that they know they're comfortable with. And if you look at the engineering curriculum in like civil and environmental engineering departments, for example, in Canada, you would see that these centralized systems are not even covered. So, I mean, even graduating engineers, they do not really know and understand what these systems are capable of. And just a quick note that they are used very, very successfully in Europe, in other places. They are smaller, they're cheaper, they are the carbon footprint is smaller, less energy consumption. And just because something is smaller, it doesn't mean that it doesn't do a good job or it is worse than a larger system. Okay, so part of the issue is there is reluctance, like nobody wants to take the responsibility or nobody wants to be liable if things go wrong. And this also applies to the city, to the municipality. I live in Manotick. Okay, so like some years ago, this was a discussion that like everyone was on septic tanks and whether the collection system, the sewage system should come to Manotick. Okay. And in Ottawa, we have one of the largest collection systems, like the longest, one of the longest in Canada. It can be minutes, but the longest time is like 35 hours, okay, until the wastewater reaches the treatment plant, okay. So at some point you need to look at it because it's very expensive. Why? In those 35 kilometers, there's lots of pumping, wastewater. I mean, you can imagine the terrain is up and down and up and down. You have to pump and pump and pump. So there's a huge energy cost at the very least. Okay, so when do we make the decision, to build a smaller system if you're really far east, west, north, or south, and it doesn't happen? Okay, one of the reasons is because if there are, multiple facilities of, let's say, wastewater treatment, is just more of a headache to operate these facilities. So there is reluctance from, for many reasons. And unfortunately, we still haven't made that transformation. And I hope it will happen. But that's exactly the problem. Yeah, things don't change quickly.
I've got one more example to add, not on the wastewater side, but actually on the drainage side. And this is one thing that the city of Vancouver has done really well, is they recently came out with their Rain City strategy, which is essentially how do we manage rainwater and how do we start to support natural infrastructure around drainage. The challenge is they also recently came out with their climate change action plan, and the two don't intersect. So there's no, this is how the Rain City strategy fits into the climate change action plan. So having these conversations equivalently to climate change, how do we plan around water in our communities, I think is really important. But also, how does this fit into other larger, probably more pressing conversations, and not just this is a report that we wrote once that we've got on a shelf to help passively inform decision making.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the question, right? Like what are the levers that you can use to really drive the uptake and making people understand, and the awareness would obviously go towards that. Having others, as Ban mentioned, the engineers kind of catch up to the development that's happening would also be very necessary to kind of do the push and the pull for these kind of systems to get adopted. So thanks for that. So Michelle wants to know, how would you convince stakeholders to seriously draw water actions in their boundaries of climate action? So kind of what you just mentioned, Alan, really, how do we merge the two? Like say the drainage strategy and the climate change strategy?
I think there's actually a paper that I've got open right now that I will post in the chat. The best part of having 100 tabs open at any given time. I think it's important to understand the water and climate Venn diagram, which is that some water issues are climate issues, other water issues are not. Some water technology is clean technology, other water technology is not. Because when we talk about, water and climate as a nexus, it's really important that those pieces fit together. But on the other hand, when we talk about aging water infrastructure, this actually requires its own priority conversation that doesn't fit into climate change, that obviously understands and connects with the climate change conversation. And I think that's something that we've still struggled with. So one is, how do we incorporate water into conversations about GHGs, for example? So water treatment plants have their own GHG footprint, and we need to understand those emissions and how we can cut those down. But on the other hand, there's a broader conversation around water, which doesn't relate to climate, and it's really important to give that the airtime it deserves as well. And so the Canada Water Agency, for example, is one great mechanism to have that conversation, but understanding that that conversation needs to be had, not just in the context of climate.
Thanks. Okay, so the next question is about Canada sharing, the boundary with USA and a lot of water. So are there any issues related to water quantity and, quality because of this, cross-boundary sharing of water with the USA? And is there any need to, update treaties that we maybe have with them?
Okay, so maybe I can take this one. No treaty is perfect, but I am familiar with what is happening in other parts of the world. So in fact, Canada and US is shown as a, stellar example of how these treaties could work and what they can achieve. So, I'm sure there's room for optimization and then improving things, but overall, it is one of the agreements and treaties that is working well, as far as I know.
That's good to know. Alan, do you share the same enthusiasm about US-Canada waters? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, not an area of expertise for me, but just to mention that it's not only static treaties. There's organizations like the International Joint Commission that do have these conversations and update the treaties over time. So a lot of these are actually quite active conversations, and the treaty is just the framework within which those conversations take place. And so, yes, while we have a good relationship with the US, water falls into that good relationship.
And there's always some pull and push, like who is polluting more, whose nitrogen and phosphorus input is larger to the lakes. And but overall, I think it is functioning.
That's good to know, right? It's a very vital resource. There have been wars about water sharing, and we certainly don't want that. So it's good to kind of know that the relationship remains good as water is related, and of course, as any bilateral issues go, there have to be push and pull, and everybody looks out for their side. So definitely can understand that. So Kirsten has a question, and she's asking us, as the next group of water leaders, what are we doing different from those who shaped water policy and water sector in the 70s, 80s, 90s now?
Well, I'm an engineer. Okay, I will not claim any expertise on water policy, but if you look at the situation in Canada, unfortunately, we have a very fragmented system, and the federal government, the provincial governments, and then territories like indigenous communities, and the problem I mean, maybe it works more or less, but when there is an issue, when there's a outbreak, or like there's a disaster, what happens is it suddenly is nobody's, oh, the other person should deal with that, or the other agency should deal with that. So a unified approach would have been better, and maybe this is something that we can do better in the future.
I'm going to take a slightly more positive spin on this as well. Just reading the text of the question is the next group of water leaders. And Kristen, who posted in the chat, is one of said water leaders and runs a fantastic nonprofit. And I threw that link up higher in the chat. I think when I even started in the water space, to hear climate discussed at all in the water space was on the periphery. To hear First Nations discussed at all that's a different problem. That's not what we're learning about in terms of the urban water challenges and groundwater challenges. So the folks in this room and the young water leaders who are coming up now are talking about water plus sustainability, water plus equity, water plus climate. And I think that's critical. There's a lot of institutions that are still very reactive, that are still very siloed. And I think this generation of leaders is going to have to work to dismantle those institutions and create new ones that are more adaptable and more forward-looking. But the fact that we are having these conversations now, I think, is already a massive jump in terms of how we are seeing water. And I think it sets us up really well for the next few decades.
Yeah, a very, very, interesting point about the water plus. And I think, that intersectionality of issues and understanding it, studying it, and, doing data-driven policy on that is what is required for us to create new policy that resonates with the needs of the time, essentially. So because we've had so many questions and a lot of interest from the audience, we've decided not to do our breakout rooms, but keep answering questions for the next 6 or 7 more minutes. And so we'll go to the next question, which is from Sushant, who wants us to talk about, you throw some light on how water issues such as flooding, contamination, scarcity are expected to affect our lives directly in the next decade. I guess, a little more pessimistic view to what we've all been talking about. But yeah, definitely kind of needed, right? Like understanding what we can expect is very important. So yeah, I'll hand it over to our experts to share their views on this topic. Alan, do you want to take it first?
Sure. And I'm sorry for all the BC examples, by the way. They're just some of the examples that I live and breathe. And I'll throw a more somber one down. I listened to a fantastic podcast that just launched called the Freshwater Stream by a BC NGO last week. And this was looking at a community on Vancouver Island, which doesn't have water reserves that recharge throughout the year. They're really reliant on their snowpack over the winter. And so I think very realistically, some of these communities are going to start seeing bodies of water which no longer make it all the way through the year and that no longer reach their final outlet. I think this to us right now is a elsewhere problem. It's not a Canada problem. You can't imagine a river that flows and doesn't meet the sea. I think we're going to start seeing that within the next decade in drier Canadian communities. And the flip side of that is I think wetter Canadian communities are going to start seeing flooding of the magnitude that they haven't seen before over the next decade. And so I think it really depends on where you live, and that's part of the equity challenge of there's going to be folks who really feel water pressures over the next decade and into the next few decades, and there's going to be others of us who are insulated from that.
And there's going to be the global effect too. So, I mean, yes, we're going to be impacted, but there are parts of the world that may not have enough water, and so there is a major problem because that can create a lot of, it can create wars, it can create migration. So we will see some of those effects in Canada. maybe not as much as other countries, but I imagine we will also be affected with what is happening globally in other places.
Well, yeah, that's a bit of a somber thought. Does anybody else have any other questions? We have a few more minutes left. Maybe we can take one more question if anybody just wants to unmute themselves and ask it. If not, I'll give 10 seconds if anybody wants to ask a question.
Could I ask one if no one else has one?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
My question is regarding the poop chart. So since COVID, the wastewater analysis has been really helping us to understand our situations and our trend. And I was told that this kind of analysis on the wastewater has been going on for a while. It's not new at all, but now it's new to a lot of people. So what kind of opportunities regarding this do you see? What the poop chart can do in the future?
So I'm also doing research on that. This is like wastewater-based epidemiology, and it is not new. Like we use this in polio, for example. So that was a really good example with UN, and that was a very extensive program. So it's just application of wastewater-based epidemiology for a new virus. Now, a bit of caution there is, so the advantage of wastewater-based epidemiology is when someone is infected, you can detect the virus in fecal matter almost immediately, and even if the person is asymptomatic. Okay. And if you look at the clinical tests, there is a delay, between the person is infected and then they start feeling a little bit sick, and then they go get tested, they wait for test results. So there's some delay there. Okay. Wastewater-based epidemiology, the advantage is you can detect it earlier. And our research data also shows that. But it is also important to see the limitations, and because like wastewater data is impacted by lots of things, by rain, by snow melt, and there are lots of variations. So sometimes it looks great, sometimes the data doesn't look as great. So it is also very difficult for public health officials to really rely on the wastewater data. But what it is it doesn't replace clinical data, but it is complementary. So it is another set of information. And so that is very important to have that. And it can also be used as a predictive tool.
Yeah, thanks for that. As you said, it's been used for a while, but a lot of us, just started hearing about it last year with the pandemic. So it does seem like something that's new and, very fascinating how we can, even predict the viral loads before people start symptoms. So definitely something that maybe, can be more, refined in the future for better prediction of pandemics and diseases and public health. Could be a useful public health tool. So thank you for bringing these really interesting perspectives on water. Water is an issue that's, touches on various aspects of our lives. We are 70% water. I like to joke, there's this, Star Trek thing where these aliens call us bags of mostly water. And I find that to be a great, just a way to talk to other people. You'd be like, hey, bag of mostly water. And they'll be like, what? But it's very accurate. Sorry for that little ramble. Again, thanks so much for bringing these perspectives, having this discussion with us. I'll hand it over to Lucas to wrap up the session. Thanks for everybody who's joined us today. We are a bit over time, so thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Pallavi. Thanks, Banu and Ellen as well. That was a really interesting panel. As somebody coming from not so much of a water background, I think a lot of that context and a lot of those kind of details and stories from places across Canada were illuminating. I had no idea that that's kind of what the water landscape looked like, and some of those challenges were really helpful to understand. So thank you for that. Thank you to everybody who asked questions. And And especially thank you to Pallavi and the rest of the CEP team for putting this event together. I think it came together very well, and we're really looking forward to the next ones. So we are actually going to be doing an event once a month with content and potentially an additional networking event every month. So look out for those. There are 2 already listed on the website. Our next event is going to be discussing the ideas in the book Project Drawdown and talking about some of those, wide-ranging climate solutions and how they might apply in Canada and in Ottawa. And we're also going to be doing an event later in the summer about mental health and sustainability and kind of how those 2 issues interplay and mental health for sustainability professionals. So keep an eye out for those. Like I said, the best way to stay up to date is to click that button on the website, that login button, and create an account. You'll get all of our emails and stay up to date with CEP. And with that, I'm going to let everybody go and enjoy the rest of their Tuesday night. Thank you so much for being part of this event, for joining us, and see you soon.